So, good evening or good afternoon. We are the PowerShell Standards Agency. So, my name is Craig Porteous. I am a data engineer at Incremental Group. We're a consultancy in Scotland. And I've worked with the Microsoft stack for about a decade. Worked mainly in BI, but also in a kind of DBA role as well. I'm the SQL Glasgow user group co-leader, and I also help Paul out with the Scottish PowerShell and DevOps user group. And I am the founder of the SQL GLA conference, which is happening on the 14th of September. There's my details as well down there. So that's my website, Twitter, GitHub, and LinkedIn details.
My name is Paul Broadwith, and I'm a senior technical engineer with Chocolatey Software. And I've got 25 years in IT in various different industries. You can see there, from defence through to the nuclear industry. And as Craig said, I am the founder of the Scottish PowerShell and DevOps user group. And there also is my details. So feel free to contact either of us after our talk tonight if you've got any questions, or if you want to see more about what we do and who we are.
Yep. So, as I said, we are the PowerShell Standards Agency, but that's the problem with PowerShell standards is that they don't actually exist, and that's where the problem is. So, we actually don't do very much. We sit about, drink coffee, talk rubbish most of the day.
Read the paper.
Read the paper, yeah. So there is no license to code or certificate at the end of this talk. We just want to kind of help people develop their own style and standards. And there's lots of information out there that will steer you right and wrong. There's best practices, there's guidelines, there's reference material. And as with anything, there's lots and lots of opinions. So there's a couple of things we want to cover today. We'll run through some of the tools that myself and Paul use that will help you kind of develop your own standards and maintain them as well. We'll outline some techniques to develop your standards, some basic kind of techniques that you may already be aware of. Then we'll look at some advanced language features of PowerShell, and we'll wrap it up with the importance of community and how that kind of ties everything together. You on mute, Paul?
No. So what tools we're going to look at today are Visual Studio Code, PowerShell Script Analyzer,
sorry,
and Pester. As you can see, we normally do this face-to-face.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot easier to be able to kind of give someone a nod when they've got to forward the slide on. Unfortunately, we can't do that today. So anyway, so Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code is the replacement for PowerShell ISE that ships with Windows. So Microsoft is going to put all of its development efforts into Visual Studio Code. It will still do updates to PowerShell ISE as long as there's security updates. We'll get security updates should there be anything that comes out. But all their effort is into Visual Studio Code. And the main reason for that is because it's cross-platform. So you can run Visual Studio Code on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And in order for it to support PowerShell, it has what's called extensions. So you have a PowerShell extension for Visual Studio Code, but it does support many different languages: JavaScript, Ruby, Python, Perl, any language you could mention. Chances are there'll be an actual extension for Visual Studio Code to allow you to use it for that language. And also, the extensions also allow you to add little features and little utilities that help you code as well.
Yeah, and these are all kind of updated regularly. The app itself and the extensions are updated separately, so they don't have a dependency, and you can get updates quite quickly to them as well.
Yeah, Visual Studio Code's updated about every month, almost on the ball.
So the next one is PS Script Analyzer. So if you haven't heard of it, it's a PowerShell module. There's a little bit of information about it from their GitHub page. basically it checks the quality of your PowerShell code. It will really kind of cover a lot of the guidelines or best practices that we'll talk about tonight, and it kind of works in the way that Microsoft Word might highlight your code if you've spelled something wrong or anything like that. It kind of highlights things that don't adhere to those kind of best practices. And it's also partially baked into Visual Studio Code as well. So you've got a kind of good tie-in there.
And also, or finally, we're also going to look at the Pester. Now, Pester's a testing framework for PowerShell itself, so it will do integration and unit testing for your code. So you can check that your code passes a certain number of tests, passes certain rules, to make sure it still produces the output that you would expect after you make changes to it, and to also make sure no one has changed anything in your code, because it will still pass the tests that that you've set up for it.
Yeah, and that also Pester also partially ships with Windows 10, but I think it's an older version.
Yeah, I think it's 304 or something like that that it ships. So yeah, the first thing you do when you get Windows 10, if you're going to use Pester, is update it.
Yeah.
So this is, although Craig said we don't do anything, we do an awful lot of work by looking at really bad code such as this. If you can see the code on the screen, we've got different types of function declaration there. So the first function, for example, has got an underscore in its name, and it's using Pascal case. The second function there has no underscore or nothing between the words, and it's using, I suppose it's kind of Pascal case. And the third function there is camel case, and again, it's totally different. We've got different indentations as well, and different bracing styles throughout the whole thing. So the PowerShell Standards Agency would reject this code, as it doesn't really meet any of the kind of things that we're going to talk about tonight.
Yes, we're not paid on commission either, so. So to kind of talk about standards and kind of help you develop your standard, there's some basics that we'll run through, and a lot of those basic concepts come under the umbrella of consistency. The first one being readability. And the first thing that comes to mind with readability, certainly for myself, is bracing style. And this can really affect how easy your code is to use and read. So there's three commonly used types of bracing style. You can really get any sort of combination of these three, but these are the main ones that everything really stems from. The first one being Allman, or the BSD indent style. So that's named after Eric Allman, who developed SendMail. The next one is Kernighan-Ritchie, or also known as the one true bracing style. That's named after Brian Kernighan and Dennis Ritchie. So Brian, they both wrote the C programming language book in the late 70s, and Dennis also created the language.
Yeah.
And the final one is Stroustrup, and that's named after Bjarne Stroustrup. Did I get that right, Paul? I always muck that one up.
You did. Craig always gets that one wrong, but yeah, you got it right. He's getting better. He's getting better.
So Bjarne created the C++ programming language. So you can see there's a lot of history behind these bracing styles. We're not just kind of picking them out of thin air. The concepts aren't new. They apply to other languages as well. So I'll jump out and we'll go into Visual Studio Code, and I'll show you what they look like. So can you see the screen okay? Is that big enough text? Oops.
Always take silence as a yes, that's fine.
Okay. So the first one that we've got here is the Allman bracing style. So you can see with the braces that are on a new line for every single brace, it's very well spaced out. It's taking up quite a few lines of code, but it's nice and easy to read. There's a lot of space between them. Then if we look at Kernighan-Ritchie, it's a lot more compressed. We've got the brace on the same line as the function, the if statement, and we've also got what is called a cuddled else. Paul quite likes that one.
Yeah, we're good. Always take silence.
Excellent.
Yeah, everybody loves cuddles, and even else's.
And then finally we have Stroustrup. So that's very similar to Kernigan and Ritchie, except the function brace starts on a new line and you don't have that cuddled else there. Personally, I like to use Stroustrup. I like the function braces to line up vertically. I find it a bit easier to read.
I tend to use the same sort of this as well, but I like to have the function declaration bracket on the same line as the function statement itself. That's the only difference. So as you can see, you can kind of mix and match.
Yeah, just whatever works best for you, to be honest. So one thing to bear in mind when you're picking your bracing style, or if you've already chosen your bracing style, is that if you're using Pester, the Allman bracing style actually doesn't work with Pester, it breaks Pester. So we've got an example of what that looks like. We've got a very quick function here. We've got the braces on a new line. So this is the Allman style. And then we've got a Pester test. If you've never seen one of these before, it's basically made up of a describe, which says what we're actually going to test, and then an it, which is what each individual test is encased in. And then we've got our test. So we've got the invoke Pester breaker function. Then we've got the pipe, and then we've just got the test that says that should be true. So if I run this code, nothing happens because it looks like the terminal might have crashed.
Always
Excellent.
the same. Always.
Yeah. Okay, I think this might be us now. There we go. So as you can see, that's actually errored out, and you can see the error is quite specific. So it says no test script block is provided. Have you put the open curly brace on the next line? So it knows what you've done. It knows that that error exists. If we just take the same code and alter it slightly, we've still got the function using the Allman style, but our describe is now using Kernigan and Ritchie, or the one true bracing style. So we've got the open brace on the same line as the describe, and also with the it. So if I run that code, we can see the Pester test is actually completed successfully. And as I mentioned as well, you can see that the function style still uses Allman, but it's just the Pester test that we updated. It's something to consider. Certainly, you may not want to adopt two separate bracing styles. So if you're using Pester, you probably want to avoid using the Allman bracing style. One other thing one thing where Visual Studio Code really helps you out with your bracing style is the ability to auto format it. So if I just jump back into the slides, you've got this quick shortcut. So if you press Shift, Alt, and F, Visual Studio Code will actually reformat your document to your chosen bracing style. And you can actually set that bracing style in the settings by pressing Control and comma and then just searching for PowerShell brace. Doing that will allow you to set an overall bracing style, like the ones we mentioned. So one true bracing style, or Stroustrup, etc. Or you can actually take every individual component and customize it to the way you want. So if you're like Paul, where he likes Stroustrup, or was it Kernigan Ritchie, but you like the brace on the same line?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can actually set that within the settings specific, so it's unique to yourself. And we've got a little bit to the side there, bracket pair colorizer. So that's just an actual extension for Visual Studio Code. That will actually highlight the brackets within your code with different colors. So that's really handy to very quickly see where functions and if statements, etc., start and finish. Although, as we discovered when we done this presentation for Paul's PowerShell group, that someone was actually colorblind, and that doesn't help them at all. So I guess it's only helpful for some people.
Yeah.
So I quite like demoing this one because it looks good. So we've got this chunk of code here. You can see the text is all over the place. We don't really have a consistent bracing style or anything. And if I do Shift, Alt, and F, it just cleans it up for you. Easy as that. And it's really handy if you're writing a lot of code and you're pasting things in from Stack Overflow, for example, or maybe you're looking at someone else's code and they use a bracing style that you can't get used to reading. You can press Shift, Alt, and F, and it'll set it to your bracing style. So that's a really handy one. That was that demo.
So next one is a little bit of a controversial subject to some people, and what we normally do is ask people to put their hands up when they choose one over the other, but as this is remote, we can't do that. So the actual subject we're going to address is tabs versus spaces. So as I said, we normally get people to put their hands up, but what we generally say is that Microsoft recommend that you use 4 spaces for your indentation. And they recommend that for all of their .NET languages. However, what this is all about is consistency. Whatever you pick, whatever you choose to use, just be consistent with it. Don't use tabs in one file and spaces in the other, or mix and match in the same file. Just be consistent. And if you, whatever bracing style you pick as well, remember Pester. If you use Allman, then you obviously can't use that with Pester, or the Pester tests themselves, as Craig has said. So you will need to remember 2 different bracing styles. Either that, or move away from Allman to one of the others, or mix and match, customize your own. But just just remember Pester when you're choosing that bracing style.
Yep. So the next one we want to talk about, that's your next stop on the road to standards, is naming. And what we mean by naming is naming your things, naming the things that you're using in your code. So your variables, your functions, your parameters as well. So starting off with variables, there's a couple of key points that you want to keep in mind. So you want to avoid using data type names that might be common in other languages. You want the variable to describe its use, and you also want to use camel case because that's what Microsoft recommends. So there's a couple of examples of bad naming, good naming there. So you can see like string name equals look. Without actually seeing the contents of that, you're not really going to know what it's going to contain. But what we would really use is first name. So we know that that's going to contain text. It's going to contain something that's the first name of somebody. Same with total fish as opposed to my variable. My variable could be anything, that could literally be anything in there. But total fish gives you an immediate indication that that's a number relating to some fish, depending on what the rest of your code does. So it's a good few things to keep in mind.
When you're naming your functions, Microsoft recommend that you use a verb noun convention. That's easy for someone else to say. So what they do to try and help you along that road is provide you with a list of approved verbs, which you can see with get verb, and we'll come to that shortly. As you can see on the right hand side as well, there's a quick snapshot of what you would get from the get verb commandlet, and it groups all of your verb names into different types as well. But just before we go on, just one little point. Now, you can use your own verbs when you're naming your functions. You can do what you want with your naming your functions. However, if you then use the defaults of PowerShell Script Analyzer, it will warn you if you're not using one of those approved verbs that Microsoft provide. So it's just something to bear in mind, that if you're running PowerShell Script Analyzer against your code and you get that error, you can turn it off. But it will warn you for that. But Craig's going to show us a quick demo of get verb as well, and we can see the groupings that Microsoft do for the verbs themselves.
Yep. So here we go.
So you can see on the screen that there's verbs you will have used. If you've used PowerShell for any amount of time, you'll have used some of these already. So there's add there right at the start. Craig's highlighted get. We've got new. We've got open. set. These are all very common ones, hence the reason they're in the common group. But if we go and have a look at some of the other groups, there's data there as well. We've got the convert to commandlets export. If we jump on to lifecycle, then we've got diagnostic group, we've got communications, we've got security and others. So you can see that Microsoft wants to group all of these verb names together. So, if you're using one verb for a function name and you want to do the opposite, like get and set, they'll be within the same group. But what Microsoft also do is they provide a website which includes far more information about that verb as well. So when you're naming your functions, you're not really sure what you should be naming it. This website will help you do that. Now, if we want to write a function, for example, that erases a disk, let's say, if we can have a look at we would go through all of this, but for obviously speed, we've already looked at it. So if we look at the clear verb there, right at the right-hand side, you'll see the comments. And this is really useful for when you've thought of a verb, in this case, erase, for your function. Have a look at the comments section, because it says here, for this action, do not use verbs such as erase. So, okay, so I don't want to use erase. What do I use? Well, let's suggest you use clear, and it will explain what clear means. So it removes all the resources from a container. Again, if we're erasing a disk contains folders and files. Disk is kind of a container. So yeah, it would be clear disk instead of erased disk. And there's, it goes through all of the verbs and makes those comments and describes those actions as well. Really, really useful when you want to name your function. Our presentation has vanished.
Sorry, that was my fault.
Technical gremlins.
Yeah, we got a good look at Craig there.
Sorry.
So yeah, that's a really useful resource when you're looking to name your functions. Craig, you look lovely, just to point out.
Thanks.
When we're naming functions, Microsoft again recommend that we use singular nouns. Microsoft have lots of recommendations, but as Craig said, there is no standards as such. They don't enforce anything. But yeah, so they recommend that you use singular nouns. So if we look at bad naming and good naming on the right-hand side there, we can see the very first one is get employees. Microsoft recommend we use get employee. Always use a singular when you're naming your functions. And a bit like variables have to be camel case, which is the small letter at the beginning, capital letter for the second word. Microsoft recommend we use Pascal case for naming functions, which is just capital letters for each word. If you're writing modules and you're putting your functions within the modules themselves, what is recommended is that instead of the verb dash noun function convention, you just change it a little bit and you have verb dash a prefix noun. And that's to make those functions unique. So for example, if I was writing a function called get database and I provided it to one of you, you might already have a function called that on your system, because it's quite a common name, quite a common thing that you would do. So if you were writing a module and you were distributing that, you would want to put that prefix in there to make it unique and to make it not conflict with anything on the destination user system. So DBA Tools, for example, has verb-DBA noun, and they have a get-DBA database function in there. Azure AD has verb-Azure AD noun. And reporting services tools, yeah, just the RS one. Now, something you'll notice with the bottom and the top one is that they're only 2 and 3 letters long. That's what's recommended, because if you're passing your module to somebody else and they have to, they're typing in the names of your functions, they need to type that prefix every single time. So Azure AD likes to be different and has, what is that? That's 7 letters as opposed to 2 or 3. But generally, you would stick to that 2 or 3.
Yeah. I know, to be honest, Power BI that's just released an admin module as well is the same. They've used Power BI instead of PBI as a prefix, which is not great.
Another 7. Maybe Microsoft just likes 7-letter prefixes. I don't know, but it's another one.
So I get the nice and easy slide. It's pretty much the same ideas as Paul has went through with the functions. You want to use singular nouns, and Microsoft also recommends Pascal case. So the details are the examples we've got on the right-hand side there. We're basically declaring an array for the parameter, and the array is called targets, whereas we should actually be using target. So the user could provide 1, they could provide 10 targets, for example. We really want to have that consistency where you're using a singular noun, and it is using Pascal case as well. So a few common parameters that you may have already came across, or you may see on modules, community modules as well. Our path, you've got force there, credential, computer name. These are really key ones that you want to pay attention to. Things like path, if you're using them, I already know as a user that if the function requires the parameter path, that it's going to look for a file path. It's going to look for a folder on my file system, something like that, because that's been used consistently across many different modules. So that's what you really want to aim for, is using, being consistent in what you're using, but also using common parameter names as well, so that the user doesn't need to dig into help. They don't need to look at what your code does to work out what you're actually looking for when you say path, for example. And really, as I said, what you want to do is be consistent. Whether you're using these common parameters or not, is be consistent across all of your functions. Don't use them in some and then adopt file path in the other ones, because the user will assume that you've been consistent and then they'll be tripped up by those. Were you going to jump in there, Paul, at all? Or
No,
okay.
I was going to, yeah.
I just heard some feedback there.
No, that might have been me coughing. You might have heard. Sorry, I've got a lot.
No problem.
So the next step on the road to standards is commenting. Now, commenting is a really important part of your code, particularly not just for you, but for other people. We have a thing in IT where we talk about getting hit by a bus. You know, what happens to, in this case, your code? What if you get hit by a bus?
Yeah, who's going to delete my browser history is the more important question.
It's not going to be me, and we can't take a hands up either. So you'll need to do it yourself. But yeah, good code almost comments itself. You know, good code kind of reads like a story. There's a start, a middle, and an end to it, and there's a flow to it as well. So what we want to do is we don't want to have too much comments. We don't want to have too little commenting. We want to get that delicate balance of commenting there in our code so that it's easily readable, but not overly so. So we've got here a tweet by Caitlin Hudden, and she's saying, jumping back into code you wrote ages ago, and what you use to actually be able to understand it, 10% luck, 20% skill, etc. But what she's really talking about is technical debt. Now, as IT people, technical debt is something we all have. All the projects we're involved in will have technical debt. If you're involved in a project that doesn't have it, then please let me know, because I've never come across one. But we don't like writing documentation. We really don't. We like writing code. We like getting our hands dirty, and working with systems. We want to leave all that to the end, but that's part of the problem. If we leave it to the end, we don't actually know why we did something at that particular time in our code. We don't know the reason for doing something one way or doing it another, or we have to go back in and understand that complex pipeline and why it's doing what it's doing and why we did it that way. So if you actually do it at the time, it actually does save time later on in the project, because you don't need to do all that figuring out. So what we should really do is comment our code as we go along. I know it's a pain, nobody likes doing it, but it's actually the best thing for everybody to do it as you're actually going through it, and you will avoid that technical debt.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even just stepping away for half an hour and coming back, the level of accuracy in the comments that you leave or the documentation you write will already have suffered.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all added comments, but let's just get it out of the way and talk about, you know, what it is to do a comment, what you need to do a comment, should I say. So a single line comment is a hash mark and then the comment itself, really straightforward. And a block or multi-line comment is the triangular bracket, hash, and ended with exactly the opposite of that, hash and a triangular bracket. So that's how you do commenting in your code in PowerShell. But we've also got two extensions on that slide, which are quite important. Better comments, what that actually does is, if you know, as I said, you've got a single line comment, you put a hash in the comment. Well, better comments allows you to put a hash and then a symbol or a code, if you like, and it will actually highlight that comment in a different color. Really, really simple, but really powerful. So if you use hash and exclamation mark, for example, that comment will be highlighted in red. And if you do hash and then to do, it'll be, I think it's orange it does for that, which a lot of people, a lot of coders put that to do bit into their code and go and search for it later. But that actual extension will highlight it in a different color. That's all it does. Really simple, but really, really powerful. And we've also got one in the bottom corner called rewrap. And what that does is it allows you just to write your comment, you know, on one long line. You don't need to worry about where it wraps and all the rest of it. Just keep going, get your comment done, and then hit Alt Q, and it'll actually wrap your comment at column 80 and put all the hash symbols on the left-hand side for you as well, kind of tidying it up. Again, really, really simple extension. As you'll find with lots of Visual Studio Code extensions, really simple, but really, really powerful and saves you quite a lot of time. So we were talking earlier on about that delicate balance of commenting, and this slide is a prime example of what I'm talking about. So as you can see here, we've only got 2 lines of code and 2 comments. Now, if that's a longer bit of code, that's still 50% of comments in there. And the very first comment says it's setting my var to 10. I don't really need to know that. As someone reading that, it's quite obvious from the code what it's doing. And the next one, copy Notepad.exe. Again, that's, you know, it's fairly obvious that that's what it's doing as well. On the other extreme, we've got a 5-line pipe here. And it's not hugely complicated. We maybe spend 5, 10. You might spend 30 seconds having a look at this if you're not really sure, and you would work out what it does. But a comment will take 2 seconds to write. So this is where we're wanting to get. We want to get somewhere in the middle between these 2 comments. Or comment sections. So here we've got the 7 lines of code that we've had above, and we've got 2 comments. What we've also done is kind of put our code into sections, if you like. So the very first section's got 2 lines of code, and it just says the number of extensions to get. Really straightforward. And the next one, we've actually got a comment telling us what that 5-line pipe does. Getting the top 5 file extensions using Windows folder. Bang. There you go. So I can read that 7 lines of code in about 5 seconds by reading those 2 comments. And that is the delicate balance of where we want to get to.
Yep. So the last stop essentially on the kind of start or the road to standards here is function help, and that's really just an extension of what Paul's been talking about with comments, where comments will tell you about individual chunks of code or sections of code. Your function help is really telling the user what your entire function does and how they can use it. It provides more detail on the function as a whole, so the user doesn't actually have to dig into your code. So I'll jump straight into a demo for this, and we can see what it looks like. So for writing help, so we've got a function here, and we've got this massive help section. The help section is just using the block comments that Paul mentioned earlier. We've got the start here, and if I scroll down, we've got the end. And we've got some of these components in between, and these are just a selection. These are probably the most common ones. You start off with synopsis, and that's really just a quick summary of what the function does. You want to be kind of thinking along the lines of like an old school tweet in length. I think that's 140 characters, is it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Then we've got description, so that's a bit more detail on what the function does. We've then got a parameter defined, so it's the actual name of the parameter that's been requested. You can see target and a bit of detail about that parameter. And then we have a few examples of how the code's used. And the examples are really important because it may be obvious to you or anyone writing the code what the actual code does or how to use it. or what kind of parameters to pass to it, but these examples will give the user that information straight away if they're not sure. We've then added some notes, and we've got a couple of links to other functions as well. And then lastly, we've got a link that takes us out to a website. So you can see there's a lot of information in there. And if I just run that, so let's put that function into my system, and all I need to do is get help and then the name of the function. And that gives us some brief help, just gives us the basics. We've got the name, synopsis, we've got the syntax that's been added in there, description, related links, and then remarks. So if I expand that with the examples switch, hit F8 again, that just provides us with the examples. We've got the name and synopsis to tell us what it is we're looking at, and the two examples. But one of the more powerful ones that I quite like is -online. So if I run that, that actually takes us out to the website that we'd link to. And this is really anywhere. You could have a page that has a lot of detail on how to use the function, how it ties in with other functions. You could have videos in here. You could have demo code chunks and things like that. So there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot you can do with that, which is really good. So if I jump briefly back into the slides, this is another case of where Visual Studio Code helps you out, but it's also a case of where last time we checked this, it was actually not working. So there's a slight bug in this functionality. But Visual Studio Code will create that full help section for you by simply pressing ## straight after or straight before the function name. One thing to bear in mind though is if you're doing this is to make sure you've already declared all of your parameters first. If you haven't declared your parameters, then the code will actually not pick up the parameter names when it's creating the function help. So if you create parameters later on, it won't update automatically and you may miss them out. But I'll tab back in and we can have a wee look to see. Yeah, so it's not working at the moment. It seems to just repaste the whole function back in again for some reason.
Yeah, that's what it was doing a couple of nights ago when we tried this. It seems to be a bug in Visual Studio Code. They actually changed it from, I think it was triangular bracket, just like multi-line comment. You used to have to do a triangular bracket and a hash like that, and then they changed it to do that. So what they did was they thought, well, we'll actually make it double hash, and now they've broke that as well. So I don't know. Yep. We can't win. We can't win. I don't know what they're going to change it to now. Or last time I checked, there was no. I don't think anybody had logged an issue about it either. So,
so nobody's noticed.
No, nobody's noticed but us. So that's actually I logged an issue for it, but we didn't have time the other night. So
yeah.
So usually...
I was just going to say, while we're here, you can actually see the bracket pair colorizer in action. So we've got the yellow for the function and pink for our if statement. And then what I can do is if I put an exclamation mark here, that's the one that Paul mentioned for the better comments. So it's highlighted red, or if I do it highlights it orange, as I said. So that's quite handy, just to let comments stand out.
And as I said, really, really simple, but it's it saves you a lot of time.
Yeah. So I mean, coming back to what we've mentioned before, the key thing here when we're talking about comments and help is to be consistent. If you're creating functions that are going into a module, or you're just creating several functions, is to be consistent with what you put in. If you're adding help, add it to all of your functions. You don't want a user to rely on the help and then they get to a function that you've not put in and they don't know what to do because there's no help coming up. So if you use it or you don't use it, is just to be consistent through everything that you do.
So next part we're going to talk about is language features. We're going to start that with advanced functions. And we're going to sort of understand what an advanced function is. So this is how you would declare an advanced function in your code. You would just have these two lines of code at the top, the commandlet binding there, and param. And as soon as you put that in, you've got an advanced function. Advanced functions give you access to these parameters: error, action, debug, verbose. There are other ones as well, but we're not going to look at any of them. You've got things like what if as well. So, and it also gives you access to the pipeline, which is really important too. So what we're going to do, first of all, we're going to look at the debug and the verbose parameter, particularly the verbose one first, and what it does. So if you have a function, an advanced function, and the user calls it with the dash verbose parameter, what happens is any write verbose statements that you have in your function will actually be executed. And what the write verbose function, the write verbose statements will do, and why the user's adding that verbose parameter, is to say, I want to have more information about what your function is doing internally. So you know, a lot of functions don't produce any output. But with the write verbose, if the user requests it, you can provide them with output. So here, for example, we've just got a very simple function to set a quota. And if the user passes that dash verbose parameter, we're going to execute the write verbose, setting file quota to whatever the quota variable is. And that's the text they're going to get, there, as you can see at the bottom there on that slide. And that's basically it in a nutshell. So what we're going to have a look at is a demo of the dash verbose, and we're also going to throw the dash debug parameter in there as well. That works in a similar way, but it's slightly different. As a little extra feature in there we're going to look at.
Such a 3 functions. I'll just put them in for you, Paul.
Thanks very much, as I can't do it from here. So if we just start that function called start Death Star with the target of Alderon, if we run that, as you can see, we don't get any output. Okay, so what happens is if a user, we want to get verbose output of that, so we can run it with the dash verbose parameter. And as you can see there, we get 3 lines of text: target Alderon, help me Obi-Wan, and enabled gun. And the actual text itself is prepended with verbose : to let you know that is verbose text. But what happens if we run it with the dash debug parameter? So as a user, again, I've run this and I'm thinking, I want to get some debug output. And again, we've got some text and it tells us what it's going to do. It's enabling the gun, and it's prepended with debug this time, as it's different, it's different text, it's debug text instead. But what the write debug actually does for you as well, if you use that within your function, is it halts the code at that particular point and asks the user if they want to continue or not. So this time we actually just want to stop the code. So we're going to press H to halt that text, or halt that function, should I say, and we get an exception thrown, which you can see there on the screen, and it tells you what it is. But I can run in command stop because the user selected the stop option. So if we run it now with dash verbose and dash debug, you could probably work out what's going to happen. But let's run that as well. So we can see that we get the verbose text that we had before, we get the debug text that we had before, and we get the question again: do we want to continue running? And this time we're going to say yes, we want to continue running. We want to destroy Alderon. And there we go. We've got the verbose text telling us that the gun has been enabled. So that's how you can add the debug, the verbose, the write debug, and the write verbose calls into your code in order to help the user get more information about what your code is doing.
Yep. So the next part under the advanced language features that we want to talk about is built-in validation, and this is probably a favorite for me because it saves me time, saves me writing lines and lines of code. Built-in validation covers a few different areas, but the first one is hash requires. So if you haven't seen this before, hash requires is really handy if I'm writing a script where I rely on a couple of modules, maybe a Microsoft one, maybe a community one, DBA tools or something, or maybe the functionality in my script requires a certain version of PowerShell, or I'm doing something with the file system, so I need it to run as administrator. That's all I need to add is what you can see on the screen there. Is hash requires dash version and then the version number, or dash modules, or dash run as administrator. There's two more there that are less common, shell ID and PS snapping. You'll probably see PS snapping going because snappings aren't supported by PowerShell core. But those are a great one to keep in mind. You're not having to write lines and lines of code checking the system if a module's installed, and then what do you do with it then? Do you warn the user? Do you try and install the module and things? One line, and that handles that. Let the user know if there's a module not installed. So the next one under built-in validation is parameter attributes, and these are sometimes known as decorators. So there's a few that relate to standards and practices, mandatory and help message. These are probably quite self-explanatory, but I'll step through them anyway. The first one, or both of these together in the example there, you can see we're declaring a parameter called target. We've set it as mandatory, and we've added a help message of plan it to target. So if you were using the code, say I done as you can see there and put start Death Star, but I've not provided a parameter, PowerShell will actually ask me to provide a parameter for target and also give me the option to do exclamation and question mark for help. So if I do that, it then provides me with the help message of plan it to target. Again, if I don't provide the parameter value, it will just error out. So that's quite good. It gives the user a bit of information. They don't need to dig into the help that you've provided. They get that information straight away. But you can notice the asterisk next to help message. That's because if you have not provided any help, you've not created the function help. As you can see in the example, there's no help section there. As long as you've put those help messages in, when the user uses the get help command, those help messages will populate the help section for those parameters. So that's quite handy. It can feed back in there for you. So the last one under built-in validation, and there's really quite a few components to this, is validation attributes. These are really handy for sanitizing your inputs, and it'll save lines and lines of code where you might have a situation where you want to check quite a few of these. So the first one being validate count. So with this, we can actually validate the number of arguments that are provided to an array. So if you're providing targets, you maybe want it to be at least 1, but you don't want it to be any more than 10. Let's not blow up the whole system here. We've also got validate length. So if you want the target to be a certain length, if it's a string, so you know it's not going to be any more than 20 characters, you know it's got to be at least 3. We've also got validate pattern, which allows you to provide a regex statement.
If you're a masochist.
Yes, exactly. You've got validate script, which is actually one of the more powerful ones, and this is one of Paul's favorites, I believe.
It is. Test path.
Yep, that allows you to provide a script block. So, as Paul says, you can use test path. So imagine you've got a parameter that's you're looking for a path. You can actually test that path is valid and it exists right there in the parameter block. You don't need to have lines and lines of code testing and sanitizing all your inputs afterwards. All of that is handled right there. We've then got validate range. So think of this as a dice, for example. You want the value to be between 1 and 6.
Or if you're some sort of AD&D enthusiast, that'll be 1 in 20.
You've also got validate set, which is one of my favorites actually, because it kind of gives you more of a user-friendly interface into PowerShell. So with validate set, I can provide a list of valid options for the user to choose for that parameter. So you can see there for the target, we want the options to be Tatooine or Alderaan. And if the user's typing in the start Death Star function and then they go to use that parameter, if they have tab completion enabled, it'll actually drop down those 2 options so they can just select it. They don't have to type it out. It just reduces any sort of human error from typing out or potential spelling mistakes as well. So I find that one quite a good one.
So the next language feature we're going to go on and talk about is the pipeline and objects. Now, PowerShell was designed with a pipeline and objects in mind. Everything in PowerShell, or all the data types in PowerShell, are objects underneath. But the first thing we're going to look at is how the pipeline works, really. So if we, for example, want to get a list of all the services on our computer, so we would use get service for that, and then we take the output from get service and we put it into the next part of the pipeline, which is select object name. So we're just selecting the name of the services, and then we take the output of that and put it into convert to JSON. So just to summarize, we're getting all the services, we're just taking the name of them, and we're converting it all to JSON. And here we can see what the kind of output that we would get. There we go. Now, traditionally, what we would do is we would get the output of get service and assign it to a variable, then take that variable and put it into select object and get the output from that, and then put it into convert to JSON. So, you know, that's 3 lines of code, variables, all the rest of it. We now just do that in one big long line separated by the pipe characters. So that's how a pipeline will work. What we're actually going to look at is how you can turn your functions to use the pipeline as well. So that's really straightforward. You need an advanced function for that. You look first of all at the parameter attribute, and here you can see on the left-hand side we've got value from pipeline. So that says you can that particular variable input object will take value from the pipeline. And then we have our 3 process blocks, or execution blocks, as we'll call them: begin, process, and end. Begin is executed before the pipeline starts, process is executed on each pipeline object, and end is executed at the very end. You don't need to have all of them. You can, for example, miss out begin and end. I often don't have an end one. So yeah, you don't have to have all of them in there. But that's how you would turn your function into something that will work with the pipeline.
So the next one that we want to go on to, and it's not so much an advanced language feature as it's kind of a more detailed best practice, is filter left and format right. So for me, coming from a database background, this is kind of second nature to me. It may not be obvious to everyone, but if you consider that you've maybe got a table full of 10 years worth of data, what you want to do is pull out the 2017 data, and then you want to do some aggregations. You want to work out total sales and things like that. For example, let's go for something generic and Microsofty. So what you're going to do is you're not going to pull down 10 years worth of data. You're not going to then do all your aggregations and then pick out 2017 at the end, because you're doing all of those calculations on so much data that you're never ever going to use. And really the same thing applies to PowerShell. So what you want to do is filter your data first, then do any formatting or changes, and then output. Now, I've got a very quick and dirty example of how that works, and to kind of illustrate that here. So this isn't the best, but when you're writing code that's dealing with data sets, you start to notice the difference depending on the way that you write the code. So this example is just saying get child item, and then we want to look at the path, everything under the C drive, all of the folders, and then we're going to pipe that to a where object where we're going to restrict it to just exe files, so just applications. And then we're going to pipe that again to just pull out the full name of all those applications and then convert that file to JSON. So running that took a total of 18 seconds. So it's not a long time, but it's good for this example. So if we do the same code again, we get the child item, everything in the C drive, but we filter it straight away. We only want to see applications, and then we pull the full name and then convert that to JSON. That took 7 seconds. So that's a saving of 11 seconds. It's not exactly enough time to make a coffee or really do anything, but if you were using this in a real world example, that might be the difference between 10 minutes and code that runs in 15 seconds or something. It's definitely something to keep in mind when you're writing your PowerShell.
The next advanced feature, if you like, is aliases themselves, and don't use aliases. And this is a bit of a pain point for me in particular. What the alias system in PowerShell was designed for was for you and me to customize our system. Now, PowerShell comes with some aliases out of the box. We've got ls, we've got cd, and if we could see them on screen there, cat, and CP for copy. This is
Sorry,
the first
Paul.
time we've done this remotely. That's cool. It's the first time we've done it remotely rather than being face to face. So this is why it's more difficult. But anyway, yeah. So these aliases are what comes out of the box. So when you install PowerShell to begin with, or you install your system to begin with, it comes with PowerShell. LS maps to get child item, CD to set location, etc., etc. However, as I said, it was built to allow you to customize your system, and that's exactly what I've done. LS doesn't map to get child item on my system, and if you write your code and I use your code and it's got ls in there, it's not going to do what you expect it to do, and therefore your code is going to break and you're going to have an annoyed end user. So the kind of rule is that if you're using aliases, use them on the command line. Fantastic, that's what they're for. Saves you typing all that stuff out all the time. We all use cd to change the directory, and also you can use it in your own code if you want. That's fine as well. But as soon as you want to distribute your code to other people, the best thing to do is actually put the entire commandlet in there, because that way you can guarantee that it's going to run on the end user system. You use the alias and you can't guarantee that.
Yep. So circling back to the piece of code that we've seen at the start, this is what Paul described, and you can see all the kind of issues with it now. We've talked very conveniently about all of the things wrong with this. And if we were to apply all of those best practices and everything that we've talked about, this is what the code would look like. And as you can see there, we've removed the help sections so that it will actually fit on the screen. We've used the right kind of case. We've used a good bracing style as well, so it's consistent, it's easy to read. We've got our verbose comments in there as well. So this is the kind of thing that if we actually done any work with the PowerShell Standards Agency or got paid at all, would pass our inspection.
Are you
So
not getting paid?
Are you getting paid?
I'm getting paid for this, yeah.
Oh, we'll need to talk about that later.
So we're looking at developing a consistent standard, and that's what it's been about through all the slides, is for you to develop a consistent standard. And the way you will do that is with what we've got there on the right hand side of the slide. So read and learn from others' code. So pick up code from your colleagues, pick up code from GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, pick up code anybody's written anywhere and read it and understand why they've done one thing over another, and read how they do maybe their bracing styles, etc. And from that, you will actually evolve your own standard. You'll take little bits out of that and start applying it to your own code. And similarly, somebody will pick up your code and be able to do the same. So, as I said, read and learn from others, whether that's actually a project you're working on within your organization or business, or that organization could be something open source, like on GitHub, for example, on Chocolatey, one of their projects, a Microsoft project. Pick that stuff up, read it, and see how other people do their code. And as you do that, you will evolve your standard. Now, one of the most important things for me in evolving your standard and in general in learning PowerShell or any language is to get involved in open source. Microsoft has a lot of its documentation on GitHub. You'll have heard that Microsoft is proposing to buy GitHub as well, so that it makes sense. They're going to put a lot of their documentation on there. But you've also got things like PowerShell Core on there. You've got PowerShell script analyzers we spoke about earlier. You've got Pester on there. You've got Visual Studio on Visual Studio Code, sorry, not Visual Studio, on there as well. So an awful lot of Microsoft's projects are actually going on to GitHub. You can actually contribute to that. You can just add little bits for the documentation, for example. You don't have to be a master coder and add lines and lines and lines of code to PowerShell core, for example. You can just actually get involved with amending their documentation. But as you do that, you will actually get a sense of community, and you'll get that bug. The bug has bitten me, and I now work for a company that is based in the US, as we talked about. I now work for Chocolatey Software, and some of that code that we produce is open source as well, so it gets you kind of further down that road. So it's something you should get involved in. I can't recommend it highly enough.
Agreed, yeah. So really kind of wrapping everything up here. I know we're probably a wee bit over time for the hour, but wrapping everything together is, and the kind of common theme, the thing that we've mentioned quite a few times throughout the presentation, is consistency. And that's the main thing you want to think about. If you take nothing else away tonight about any of the standards or any of the best practices or anything, it's consistency as you want to remember. That's the one thing that you want to take away. And because being consistent in your code, being consistent in what you write, breeds trust in your code. And then that trust from other people, from yourself as well, looking back at your own code. I've looked back at some of the stuff I wrote a while back, and with shame is probably the nicest word to use.
When I look at your code, I feel the same way. So yeah, I get that feeling too.
Actually, I'm just going to remove my GitHub link at the front there. But that trust in your code means that people will reuse and they'll recycle your code, which is great, and that kind of ties totally in with the the community aspect that Paul's been talking about. And it's the kind of thing that if you're looking at other people's code, you're going to trust that. If it's consistent, then you're going to use it. Think about it in layman's terms. If you receive a letter from your bank, you immediately know that it's definitely from your bank because it's consistently bad news. Or more accurately, it's got the same logo, it's got the same type of paper, it's got the same font and things that are used, so you don't question it. And your code is really the same idea. If you're consistent, if it's readable, if it's usable, then people trust that it's reliable code. And that's the one thing you need to kind of take away.
So thank you guys for listening to us. We have overrun slightly, but has anybody got any questions? I know there's a bit of a delay between us and you, but and I don't mean the time zone. So if you've got any questions, we'll hang around until someone says no, we don't.
So
there is one question from the audience. Let's see. Can the deck be shared?
yes, definitely. So what we actually have is we're working on a site at the moment where we're going to collate all this information together called PowerShellStandards.agency. What we'll be able to do is we'll have a lot of the information and more expanded information up there, but you can also find the slides, I believe, and all of our demo code at that URL there.
Yeah.
Is that right, Paul?
It is, yeah. There's, as Craig said, the website is something we're working on, so it is a project in itself. So when you go on there and find there's not a lot of information for one thing or another, it's because we are working on it. So it's very much a work in progress.
Yep, but if you use that short URL, that'll get you to the demo code that we've used. We actually wrote a PESR test to test that our presentation was ready to go. It was something we picked up from Rob Sewell, who's quite handy. And we've got the demo code and the slide deck in there as well.
Yeah, it's all there. I've just checked.
Well, we appreciate it, guys. The recording should be up as soon as we finish, as soon as we stop the broadcast.
Brilliant.
And it was good to speak to you guys as well.